Now, Ukraine and its Western allies are meeting in Paris for more negotiations on a peace deal to try and end the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, this is yet another summit of the so-called Coalition of the Willing that was launched by the British and the French leaders last year. The purpose of the summit is to try and work out security guarantees for Ukraine, which will be implemented after the war ends. Now, 35 countries are taking part. 27 of them include France, Germany, Britain and Italy, that are being represented by their heads of state. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is there in person as well. Now, the United States, interestingly, is being represented by Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Now, Trump is still in the United States. A draft statement from the summit was released before the talks took place. It says that the United States will lead a ceasefire monitoring and a verification mechanism if a peace deal is agreed in Ukraine. The statement further adds that Ukraine's European allies will participate in the security guarantees as well. Now, the statement has further added that Washington will commit to support a European-led multinational force deployed in Ukraine. This will be after an eventual ceasefire. The statement says that this is in case of a new attack by Russia. So the Coalition of the Willing wants to put NATO troops in Ukraine to deter any further aggression by Russia. However, Moscow has repeatedly opposed the presence of soldiers from NATO countries in Ukraine. The tussle over troops has been ongoing for a few months. By September 2025, 26 countries from the Coalition of the Willing had pledged to deploy their soldiers or to provide other military assistance. But so far, only Britain and France have officially committed to providing the troops. Poland, Spain and Italy have so far declined to contribute ground forces. Finland and Estonia have also declined, saying that troop deployments will dilute their own border defenses. Meanwhile, Germany has left the door open to sending their soldiers, but only if it gets parliamentary approval and if the United States is also involved. The European officials have been citing differing estimates for the size of the potential Western peacekeeping contingent in Ukraine. The figures have ranged from 15,000 to 20,000 soldiers, though some officials are hoping that the force could approach probably the 30,000 mark. All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got Mr. John Erath, who's a Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Mr. Erath, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, what do you make of this draft proposal by the so-called Coalition of the Willing that states that the United States too would be required to send in its troops as security guarantees? Do you think this is something that could be acceptable to the United States at all?
I think that the wording will have to be done very carefully. The Trump administration thus far has shown an unwillingness to put U.S. troops in the mix for any kind of NATO operation. So there may be a change in that, or it may be a question of what the U.S. participation will be and how it will be described. If it's monitoring and compliance oversight, then that may not be taken to mean U.S. troops being involved. But I think you've identified the real issue. The U.S. troops are the key to a sustainable peacekeeping force, and without them, the credibility is just not as strong.
You know, it's interesting that you say without the U.S. troops, the credibility of the Coalition of the Willings, peacekeeping or monitoring troops would just not be credible. But the fact is, the Russians are completely opposed to any kind of NATO presence in Ukraine. If this is now set up as one of the conditions for reaching a ceasefire, do you think ceasefire will even happen?
It's difficult to imagine how this is going to work. As you have identified, Russia remains opposed to any such arrangement. Russia remains opposed to the presence of NATO forces in Ukraine, in areas of the former Soviet Union. And Russia, the issue of territorial control has still not been resolved. So I think we're still quite a distance from a sustainable ceasefire. And let's also remember that this was essentially the same approach that was tried in 2014 with the Minsk agreement, and that did not work out. The war started again in 2022. So they're trying an approach that has failed in the past.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. John Irath, for joining us with that perspective there.
You're welcome.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.